Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Become a Master Magician in Revit for Fabrication. I'm Allie Prohl from the eSUB's Marketing Department, and we are excited to be doing this webinar with our friends over at Applied Software. Now, before I introduce you to our awesome hosts for today's webinar, I want to cover a few housekeeping items and give you a little background about eSUB. As always, all of our webinars are recorded and will be sent out to all registrants after the webinar concludes, so you can re-watch it or share it with your network. We also love questions, so we want to encourage everyone, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type those in the chat box of your GoToWebinar panel, and Gabe will try to answer those at the end of the webinar. Now, a little bit of background about eSUB. eSUB is the only project management system built exclusively for subcontractors. We offer an integrated set of solutions so you can take all those point solutions, time, daily reports, emails, RFIs, change orders, submittals, and more, and bring them together into one integrated home. Now, eSUB is user-friendly and designed for the field and loved by the office. With eSUB, we make it easy to capture and document work to be shared in real time with the office. The office gets a window into the job site activity to initiate documentation and begin billings. As a construction operations system, eSUB is the accounting integration specialist and helps companies eliminate departmental silos and improve efficiencies between design, construction, and accounting. Wow. Okay, so now the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm happy to introduce you to our stellar presenter for today's webinar, Gabe Hernandez. Gabe specializes in the MEP and architectural products and provides training, implementation, and product support services. Gabe has expertise in designing and implementing BIM processes and workflows. He is an Autodesk certified instructor and a certified product support professional. If that wasn't impressive enough, he also has achieved Autodesk technical sales professional status in multiple categories. He previously worked for architectural firms and MEP consulting engineers. Lastly, Gabe assisted in obtaining one of the first Autodesk fabrication specialization authorizations in 2013. Pretty impressive guy we got presenting today.
So we're going to get into the initial project setup and workflows and how to determine that. You should be asking some basic questions before you get started. And one thing is kind of, again, from my background, I started out with AutoCAD back in the late 80s, early 90s, and one of the things you really need to know about the software is how to get started properly, and we'll talk about that, and it's really important. With CAD, I was self-taught early on, got through formal training. I learned templates. I learned how to do project setup the proper way. We shortcutted a lot of things, but in Revit, if you try to utilize those exact same processes, they may not work for you. And hopefully you guys will get some of that if you guys are beginners here and just brand new to Revit. We'll also talk about working in teams. With fabrication, and collaboration is huge. We're getting a lot of new clients working in the collaboration cloud services or cloud projects with BIM 360 design and fabrication. So that's coming up, and this will be a portion of it. It's not necessarily BIM 360 design, but it's kind of the same idea and process, so you guys can get an understanding of it. Also, we'll wrap up with is templates and some basic standards. Standards meaning, how do you best model manage your product? When you finish a model and a project, what do you do? Where do you go next with versioning, upgrades, and all that kind of good stuff? We'll talk about it. All right. For you guys and gals that are new users to Revit and Revit for fabrication, right? The first thing you should understand is, ask these important questions here. And the first two questions are, what should you know before you get started, right? Is the version. That's number one. That's why we asked you that in the poll. Most people are in 2019. 2020 has been released in April, May, somewhere, I think late April maybe. There's been some basic improvements. 2019 is really the way to go. If you're still back in 2018, that's fine. The fabrication portion hasn't jumped too far, but there's been a lot of improvements. I also let me see here. I think I'm having audio issues here. Let me double check and see if I can fix my mic.
It's not a webinar unless something goes wrong. And if it's not audio, it's the video or the PowerPoint. So thank you everybody for being patient with us.
All right, let's see. How about now? Do I sound a little? Maybe I'll slow it down a little bit. Maybe it's just my microphone's not picking up.
That'll
My
be good. We'll let you know.
all right,
Thanks, Gabe.
all right. I appreciate it. Again, where should what questions should you be asking? Um, the first thing is the version because Revit is not reverse compatible like you do have in a CAD environment or an AutoCAD environment where you can save as. Even now in the later versions, there's issues with object enablers and things like that, and not being able to save back to previous formats in the latest versions. Coordinate systems. This is huge, especially when you're coordinating at the end of a fabrication project with Navisworks and BIM 360 design and doing our Navisworks and doing clash detection. What are your coordinate systems based off of, and where is this model being, what level and the X, Y, and Z basically for you guys that are CAD users. Um, Project information and title block information, of course, that comes along with any project. But the procedures for updating the project, schedules, like when is it due, when are you getting updates, who's working with what, all those things need to be kind of hashed out prior to getting started. Once you get all of this information for each user kind of down, then it's going to give them the ability to figure out the best workflows for your office, right? And when you get started, where do you get started with the files, right? And I'm going to get into actual Revit here in a second. I don't want to overdo the PowerPoint here, but I will get into Revit to show you a lot of these processes in action and what to kind of look for, picks and wise. Working with models and link files in Revit is important to understand because of upgrading, purging, auditing, cleaning them up, doing your due diligence. That's something that a lot of users overlook. And when we work with companies, I do tech support on a daily basis. Um, when we work with certain companies, we get issues, and these issues that we see that arise are from basic, file corruption, auditing, and so on, right?
Getting back on track here, where to get started. We're going to talk about models and link files, working with groups as well, and if we can get through templates and project standards, we'll get through it all. There are some information in this PowerPoint that will be a part of this session that I think is being recorded and should eventually be placed somewhere. I'm sure you can get the information from Ali or Applied Software. But this information will kind of cover talking about collaboration, continuing with collaboration with linked models in the process, right? Let me jump into Revit itself real quick. Give me 1 second. Let me do this quick. Here we go. So once you understand the questions, or once you've gotten an answer to all of the questions that you need to know prior to getting started, right? Working through a file or being given a file from an external source and knowing what to do with it is kind of one of the first things you need to know and understand what's going on. Here in my data sets, I have a file that's given to us again for track purposes, but it's centralized. And one thing that I'll clarify in a little bit is the whole central file process and what it kind of looks like, diagram what it looks like actually. But project here, this file is in these newer version, it tells me what version that it's actually in, right? This is an old version. One of our best practices to always name the actual or put the version in the name of the file. I still think this is relevant out there in the industry because even with this small, tiny version right here, most users are cranking and banking or going and drawing so fast that they're just kind of overlooking some of these things, right? I put it in my thumbnail previews as well to kind of make it obvious that it's an older version so that we don't have issues with accidentally upgrading or updating files that where you can't save it backwards. So for everyone that is new to Revit, one thing to take note of is that you cannot save backwards.
Hey, Gabe,
right?
we're all still seeing the
Yes, ma'am.
PowerPoint, so if you can
Okay.
screencast your Revit, that would be
Let's
great.
see here. There we go. How about that?
Yep, I think, yep, we're on your file, so.
All right, here we go. Here it is. Here. This is the sample file that I was talking about with the file version listed here below, and as well as in my thumbnail preview, right? But one thing to take note of that you should be very cautious of when you are working with a consultant's file or a file that's been given to you from an external source. Down here at the bottom of the screen is kind of what you need to be looking at. There is always the ability to audit a project model, and you always get this ominous warning that pops up. There's no way to turn this off, but it'll tell you here that the operation is going to take a long time, and it's supposed to be used periodically for file maintenance and preparing for upgrades and so on, right? And do you wish to continue? And of course we do. Now, in my training courses, I always get the question, you know, do we have to audit, or how often should we be doing this? It just depends on you know, how many people you're working with, how large the project is. Just to get into a good habit, check the audit button every time you open up the product or every time you open up a model. You'll be doing everyone a solid if you audit the file, because it fixes corruptions and errors that have been, you know, brought in through either custom families or some type of import or even export out of the project, right? The bigger the project, the more issues you might come across. Now, they're a lot more stable than our previous CAD files in the past, but there's still best practices that you guys need to follow, and this is one of them, auditing files as often as possible. So when we get a project to set up from the beginning, we always want to open up the initial background, you know, the file that we've been given, and run this audit. Also, you always want to make sure that you detach from Central, because again, the Central file for that model from the consultant's file is looking for their network share, their network drives, and their network information. You don't have that in-house or in your environment. So detach from Central basically severs that network link and just makes it a file on its own so you can use it as a background. Of course, before you do all of this, you always want to make a copy of all this, archive it, you know, the extension to old so you can't, you know, lose it or accidentally upgrade it or whatever, but archive everything always and then do all these processes. In this case, I'm just opening up the architectural background because I'm going to be doing this in 2020, right? If I opened up my MEP Central model that's utilizing this background in 2020, it's going to do what we call a temporary upgrade to the backgrounds. And I want to kind of cut that off at the past. So I'll open up that background. Now, this is a question that you should understand what's going on here. When you work with other people's files, right, they have work sets, or they might have multiple team members working on the project at the same time. So they have work sharing enabled, which they break up their models as they see fit. The two options you have here is to detach and preserve work set. And basically what this does is this maintains the same model file, but it also maintains your work sets the way they have them in their office. They're an architectural firm. They're an engineering firm, an MEP engineering firm, schematic design. They do things differently than you do on the subcontractor side, right? You don't necessarily aren't able to you know, bring in those standards into your firm, or you don't necessarily want them to be brought over, right? So you want to detach and discard work sets, right? This is going to kind of, you know, break it all back down into a Revit file that's more usable and that's more flexible for, you know, again, new users to the environment, and, you know, new users to Revit for fabrication. So in this case, I would just detach and discard. It goes through the upgrade process, and again, every time you see anything in the Revit environment and you see a hyperlink, I was a CAD manager for 8 years, and what I regret that I didn't utilize more of is the help menu and the hyperlinks within these dialog boxes. They tell you everything you need to know. You basically can just click on any blue hyperlink in any of the dialog boxes, or if you have a question mark, like up on the right top corner side of any of these, it's going to tell you everything you need to know about that process. So this will tell you what's happening when you're upgrading a model. You need more info or get more details, and read it. It's really important. It'll really open up your eyes to how things and processes work within the Revit environment. Now, also take note that this is taking a little bit of time, right? It's about 72%. I'm upgrading from 2018 2020. The last time I did this, it was 18 to 19, which is, it still took about the exact same amount of time. But one thing that I will have you take note of here is that you want to go from, say, 18 to 19 and then to 20, right? If you're starting this process out from scratch, you're a new firm and you're building your standards, what I would write down as the standard, the final say is only upgrade version to version, right? In this case, I'm just doing this for a quick webinar. These are training files. They're not actual projects, so it doesn't really matter what, the little things that I'm missing here, but for time's sake, right? Here, you'll get another dialog box for unresolved references. Don't follow or don't bring in your bad CAD practices here, like what you do with XREFs. If you have CAD files and XREFs and external or references where you have 20 of them in a file and 15 of them are unloaded or they're no longer passed correctly into the file, but they still reside within the drawing, right? That causes rampant corruption within the whole process, right? So anytime you see references within any of the models that you work in, resolve that stuff. If you don't just turn a blind eye to it. It's really important to understand, to fix that stuff. If you don't know what it is, wherever the person that you're working with or the contact at the firm that you're getting these files from, to kind of clarify what's in these models, right? So it's things you need to know. I'll go into all of these lists. There's CAD files in here. There's no markups or point clouds or luckily topographies, but say there's a civil file, I'll remove it from this project here because this is going to be my background. Mind you, remember, I archived in the original version. There's CAD details in here. I don't need any of that. I'm a subcontractor. I don't need any of the architectural stuff, right? I remove it out of here. I get rid of it and get out of this dialog box. So manage links is like your XREF manager. You go in there and fix it all up, get rid of what you don't want, and then clear it out. Another part of the process here is in the manage tab up here, let me extend my screen here so you can see these tools a little bit better. I have the ability to purge unused, right? I can purge unused here, and note that I've only got, not too much, about 33 elements to purge. But when I do purge this model, right, you have to keep clicking purge unused. Notice there's 10, right? And then I click it again, and there's 5 now. And then I click it again, and now there's 0, right? So this is a process. You have to keep clicking and keep purging until it's 0 out to ensure you purge everything out of that file. Now again, you don't need any of this stuff but the levels, right? Talking about that, everything in Revit, for you guys and gals that or for everyone that's new to the process, everything in Revit is defined off of level here, right? Everything lives off of a level. So these are what we call datums, and this is what we will use to create our project and to set up our project correctly. So when we do get updates or changes and if our models aren't static, these things, when they change in this architectural background, when we get the update, they'll change in our models as well, okay? We'll come back to that in a second. So I'm just going to go ahead and just close this out, save this file, just call it the new architectural background, right? And now that file is good and ready to go for me to utilize in my projects or in my project environment, okay? And there's a lot more that you can do here, like getting rid of all of the views and schedules and 3D views, and if there's renderings and like walkthroughs and all this stuff in here in these project browsers, you don't need any of that. And if you need to come back to reference any of it, you go back to the archive copy, right? That's your backup. So that's why you should always have the backup plan, right? Create a backup and then manipulate and do whatever you want to do. Let it all out, clean it up, and then now it's ready for prime time. A lot of firms again, come back and ask me the question, do I have to do that every single time? Well, yes. If you want to maintain your models or have a well-maintained model, if you skip it, again, you're running the risk of, in large projects, especially at the end in the deadline, right? You're going to run or find some corruption or something like that. It fails, right? So the companies that I've worked with that have the most efficient workflows have this as best practices or standards, and make sure everybody's informed and follows procedure accordingly, right? There's some other things here, and I think my PowerPoint earlier was giving me a fit, so hopefully this works. When you're working with consultants' files, right, you might also encounter what we call warnings. I'll show you this here in a second. You can make sure, I would definitely make sure you are double checking your warnings prior to, especially if the model in the background is really going to affect issues with your designs, right, or with your layouts. Now, this is a manual process, and I'm going to come back to this when it comes to the upgrade process here in a second, right? Let me show you something real quick. There's also another function here in Revit. Now, when they put this little circle key, this display thing here that kind of takes you into this gray screen, I kind of rolled my eyes at it like a Revit diva and just thought, man, what the heck did they do that for, right? You have to click this home screen to kind of get back and forth between it. I found a good reason for it. And that's going to lead me to this next thing here. And this is going to we're going to talk about this twice in this presentation. I'm going to talk about it now as far as the upgrade process and getting started, as well as archiving later on. On the add-ins tab, there is this Revit add-ins. It's called eTransmit. And again, for new people to the newer versions of the auto products, everything nowadays is pretty much managed through this thing called the Desktop App Manager. Your licenses, your software that you have installed, as well as like updates, right? In the update is where you can find these extensions, right? These are my old ones, or these are architectural ones that I don't typically work with in training or anything like that, so I leave them uninstalled on my systems, and I only use the fabrication stuff or anything related to MEP, right? But there's some in here that I already have installed for other versions. So this is where you get them under your updates in the App Manager, okay? To utilize this extension or this add-in for Revit, you have to be outside of a model. You can't be in a model. So you go here to this add-ins tab, click on transmit a model. For you guys and gals that are old schoolers like me in AutoCAD, there used to be a process called pack and go. And pack and go used to be how we transferred files between offices in the CAD world, right? It would pack up fonts and font maps and CTB files and all these other things, and even gave us transmittals and zipped it up for us in a nice zip file that we can email, or at that time put on a drive and mail it out or something, right? This is kind of the process for that in Revit. eTransmit is the way to not only archive your projects, but to get started in a project. This is a good way to request files from consultants. So when you are supposed to be working with firms or companies that are going to give you or deliver you Revit models, ask them to e-transmit it to you, right? Because there's things that they can do with those files and fix, or instead of you having to do everything that I just showed you there and, do your due diligence, right? You might have been thinking in the back of your mind, well, shouldn't they do that for us before they send it to us? Well, we all know that that's never the case, right? You can do it yourself or process kind of done yourself here, or request it from them, and if they don't know how to use it, then of course you're still going to have to do it. But what is it, right? Here at the top, I basically can go in here and browse for folders or models to transmit over, or so that I want to send over to, ABC engineers or whatever, right? I'll highlight my MEP model here, and I'll click on open. I can also do in top folders as well, and then I can say, where do you want to save this to? I'm going to save it on my desktop and create a new folder with today's date on here. Let's see there. Click on OK. And then I go down through my options. I'm going to include a transmittal and an error report if there's any errors within this process, and a transmittal of what I'm actually transmitting. Create output folder for each source model. So if I have multiple files in here, multiple models, links upon links, it's going to create source folder. It's going to create its own folder setup for us. Files that I can add to this process include other Revit link models, CAD links, markups, external keynotes, right, and decals. These are kind of fancy images that are used typically in architecture, right? I can also add files here on the right-hand side, and I can go to a file location, and I kind of set one up in our directory here under additional files. Maybe I have PDFs, CAD files, you know, that kind of stuff. I can add these files in here. Oops. To the e-transmit, and that's probably going to take forever. I really don't really want to do that. Let me remove all these here. I'm going to just do one PDF for now. Apologize for this. I shouldn't pick the entire thing. Oh, there you go. I can shift it. Just do 2 PDFs. And then the upgrade and cleanup process. This is really the best part of it that I'm talking about, where it comes to file maintenance for you guys and gals that are BIM managers or project managers that have to kind of maintain these models. This is where you can actually clean up the file, disable works, and purge unused. So it's, again, what I just did manually. You could also include all sheets or just everything in, you know, all the views that are in that project, or just the views are on sheets, right? These views that are on sheets mean that it's just the stuff that they documented. Might be the important stuff. Everything else is extra, right? You don't need it. Or views on sheets, and then you that you specify, and you can actually select what you want to bring in only, right? So this is, again, you don't want to do renderings or any kind of legends or anything that's non-essential, walkthroughs, right? All that stuff is non-essential to subcontractors. And then you can remove all sheets but include all views, or, you know, again, specify this option. So again, you've got some options in here to kind of make it work for you. I usually do include views on sheets. Again, hyperlink here, how to use eTransmit. This takes you again to that help menu, right? This is the #1, I think, digital Revit book. It's free. It comes with your program. Hit F1 or hit the question mark, and here's everything you need to know about eTransmit, and then some. All of the add-ins, and then everything else you need to know, right? So it's all in there. Take advantage of it. I'll click on Transmit the Model. It goes through the process, a time lapse here. There's an upgrade because I did finish up upgrading the MEP model. I just did the architectural background, so it's actually going through the upgrade process for me, and it's just all going, you know, through this one process. So is something that you guys can take advantage of as far as bringing in files. Always should go through this process. It's a good way to do it, as well as sending anything out of your office should go through this process, and it's all part of your program. It should be a part of your subscription. Okay, let it go through this process. Let me go back into this here. When you're working with link models, you know, there are some functionality that you can use, like copy monitor, cleanup as well, but also making sure that any link files, where I've seen corruption is the link files first haven't been upgraded to the proper version, and they haven't been cleaned up as far as, you know, links within those files. But also another big one is that they're put into like 4 or 5 subfolders within the project, and that's not good. You always want the link files to reside in the same file or the same folder as your project. That's one thing to take note of that I didn't. I always try to organize it my old school CAD way with, you know, 5 folders deep, and that's not always a good thing within Revit. Okay, keep that in mind. And then, of course, when we get into the work sharing process and you're working with links, we're going to talk about, file folders that you might see in these projects or in the structure there that you don't know where they came from, but you're not going to want to ever mess with them or delete them. And I'll show you what they are. So going through this process of work sharing, you guys that work in teams, there's a process called work sharing, and it's where you set up the central file, you have local files, and then you create these things called work sets. The first thing that I want to kind of clarify here is that always make sure that you don't, or make sure that everybody understands you don't use work sets like layers in AutoCAD. That is the first mistake most or 9 out of 10 CAD users do when they learn about work sets, is they try to make them like use layers, right? But it's not. You don't want to add that complexity to Revit, but there are some comparisons there, and you'll see that as we go through this. What happens is you basically take the model or the project once it's all set up, and you save it to your server or on the network, right? Just like you would a regular CAD project, and everybody works off of it. But in CAD, we have read-write, where it'll not lock somebody out, somebody's in it. In Revit, you have what we call work sharing, where you create a copy of it on your local C drive from the server or the central location, and you work on yours on your C drive, and whenever you save, it saves all your information up to the server and then updates everybody throughout the entire project, right? Everybody else that's on the team. That's kind of the concept of work sharing. All right, so that's my e-transmit right there. While I was going over that, I'll come back into that in a second. It goes through the process. I can open the folder or just click on OK. I'm going to open the folder here externally. Let me show you here. It created my folder, right? And here's my error report, right? It's an Excel file. Tells me everything, errors and warnings. This is the warnings and the things that you should be taking note of in any project that you're getting, right? So if they're giving you stuff that's broken, right, here at least you can see it before you get started. Ask questions if you don't know, right? It gives you time stamps and so on. Here's my transmittal, and then of course the files, right? Everything that comes along with it, right? Let me go out of here. Let me go back to this file here. Now, when I go back into this project here, let me go back one, and let's get into this where we left off here on this last slide with work sets. When you are working with these work sets, you need to make sure that you take in some consideration. First, the main reason why you need to work with work sets or in a work shared project is if you have more than one person at a time. If it's just one person at a time on the project, you never have to enable this, right? If it's more than one, which is most cases, then of course you enable work sharing. Project size is another one. You have like a 20-story building, right? It's great to have work sets so that you can break up the projects by floor or by level, and it will allow you to open up just the floor that you're working on at that point, right? You have 10, 20 users. Work sets can help manage a project. You can also consider member roles by discipline and basically break up the project by discipline, like mechanical, pipe work, duct work, pipe work separate, plumbing, sanitary systems, or domestic systems separate, right? So that might be consideration for design teams or groups, right? And then, of course, what we call demand loading, and having these work sets have what we call the default work set visibility. So, for instance, if you have a project that has 20 work sets in it, and you're only working on one, well, when you open up a project with all 20, it takes 10 minutes. Well, if you open up just the project with just the one work set, it's going to take a minute, if that, to open up, right? And you want to work with that process. And what the visibility settings are is you pick which work sets you open up and what's been actually going to be taking up your resources and the processes in the background, okay? All right, let me show you this here with the work sets. Let me go back in here. Now, let me go ahead and open this up. again, this upgrade process, you always want to make sure that you get that stuff upgraded prior to getting started. And if you are experiencing these upgrades as you're opening, right, you want to ask questions. Ask somebody. Now here, this is because I've checked this up a couple of times, right? It tells me here, and don't just close this stuff out. Screen capture this, send this to your support team, or read it, right? Sometimes, or when you're brand new to this, it's not going to make much sense. But what this is saying here, it's being upgraded, and it's also being changed from a different location, which is okay because this is again my training file thing here, so not a big deal. I'm going to go ahead and go through this process here. So some of these warnings that you see through this process are you need to understand what they do and where you're going with this. When you open up somebody else's files, this is kind of what you'll experience. You get these, hey, it's not in the right location. You're also upgrading it. To avoid all of that, what could I have done? I could have just transmitted all these models, and all of that would have been fixed. I would have had no issues with pathing or locations or any of that, as well as upgrade, because I would have been doing it from the previous version, right? All right, come on, upgrade here. Still got a couple more minutes. Let me switch back over to the PowerPoint while that's thinking real quick and kind of go over some of these tips and tricks. I'll come back to this working with teams in a second. Here are some questions, though, that you can kind of take note of when you are working in teams, and you should know this prior to getting started working in work sets and all that. You need to know where your files are being saved and located, or where they're located on your systems, where the local file that you'll be hearing me talk about is actually saved to. There's also best practices for creating new local files weekly or daily even, and I'll show you the process for that. And that also, what this does is it ensures that users are constantly synchronizing the central and making sure that they are updating everyone in the project the proper way. And there is some processes for upgrading and for saving and synchronizing, and I'll come back to these general options and synchronizing with central here in a second, and I'll explain the local files in a minute. Let's see here, am I back up to running? Come on, Revit. But the point of the local files and central files is that, again, more than one person can work on the project, and then work sets take that to the next level and divvy up the project into whatever your project teams are now. Say you guys have a pipe team, a duct team, or maybe you're just a one or two person team and you do both duct and pipe, right? You can break it up into work sets and kind of break out the work, and allow each user to kind of work on it on their own. You can also check out work sets. So if I wanted to take a work home, if I was working from a remote location or something, I can take my my work set and check it out under my name. Let me do this real quick. Give me 1 second here. Let me grab the screen so it doesn't run away. So this, look up all screens, this model upgrade. This is what you want to avoid when you're working with linked models. The upgrade is temporary. The upgrade changes are not saved to the link model, right? So when I started this off, the reason why I opened up the architectural model to show you that whole purge and cleanup process was so that we could avoid this warning, right? But if you see this, don't ignore this, right? Every time you open up this model, it's taking me a couple of minutes here to do this. To avoid it all, I would have upgraded the link models first and saved them to the latest version, and then got into the central model, re-centralized it, and then I can create a local file and then work sets and so on, right? So again, I'll show you that here in a second. Come on, Revit, you can do it. Of course, because I have you guys watching, it doesn't want to work for me. It did this a lot faster in the past. Get rid of some of this stuff. All right, here we go. So a couple of things about work sets. We're kind of getting there, about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to kind of get into this quickly. This is a central file. I need to go ahead and centralize it real quick. I need to save it first. Let's see. Here's my work sets. Under the Collaborate tab, under the Manage panel over here on the left-hand side is where you have the Work Sets button here, or the Work Sets dialog, right? Here is where you can create work sets. It's again, divvy up the work if you want to, but there's a couple of rules that you need to understand about this: editable, owners, borrowers, and then of course this whole default visibility right over here on the right-hand side, visible in all views. If it's stuff that just needs to be, used for coordination, but not in every view and everything in the projects, but you're using it there for background stuff, right? You can use or check this thing on and off to make it visible or not, right? It's up to you. In this case, in this simple file, we're just leaving everything on. The owners and borrowers is what's the real key to work sets, and understanding this process is becoming an owner of the work set. So if I had geometry on Subduct and support, right, and my name was here under the owners, G. Hernandez is my username up here. That means that nobody else, no matter who they are, what their credentials are, they cannot come into that work set and work in it. So that basically locks people out. Now that might seem like a good idea for whatever reason, but you're basically just putting more red tape into the process, right? So you want to kind of only do this on certain occasions. And what I would do that for is only when I'm taking work home or if I'm checking out a work set. That one should be owned, but every other one should be what we call borrowed. Now, how do you set it to owned or borrowed? Well, you set the work set to either what we call editable or non-editable, right? If it's non-editable, which is what you see no here, right, that means that you can only become a borrower of that work set. If I had set this to editable, like this first one, it shows up under the ownership, my username, saying that I now will be the owner of this work set, which again can be a bad thing. So be careful when you're working through these processes. It's simple to add them. You can just type it, click the new option here, whether you can set the default visibility here, and then just give it whatever new work set name you want it to be, right? Pretty simple stuff. And then of course that help button, right, for you that are new users, again, teaching you everything you need to know about the work sets and the dialogue and breaking it all down for you. So everything is here, it's at your fingertips. Just use it. There's also a help button here you can use, right? Every project starts with two work sets, work set 1 and shared levels and grids, and then you add to that after. You can rename work set 1, but I wouldn't rename shared levels and grids. Just leave those as is. Work set 1 could be, the initial, where everything is on. And other firms that work in the process also don't use work sets. It's not such a big project, and I'm not worried about having to break it all up to separate it all out, right? I just want everything on one, and it come, first serve. Then you just leave everything on work set 1, and it'll automatically default to it. When they're created and when they're being placed, everything defaults to work set 1, and then it becomes first come, first serve. We can work in the same project at the same time. It's whoever picks the item first becomes the owner or the borrower of it, and then there's this whole editing request and all that. Right? That comes up a little bit later. Now, another couple things about this works here, down here at the bottom. When you are, for you that are familiar somewhat with work sets, down here is what we call the work sharing display. And the work sharing display basically allows you to break up these work sets or a visibility of your work sets by checked out status, gives you colors, owners, model updates, right? And then of course work sets. This is the one that I'm going to turn on, and you can assign different colors to different work sets, right? Now, to turn it on, down here at the bottom, I'll just go to the work sets option and turn on my visibility settings for work sets. And this gives me a better understanding if, again, you're working in a team and there's lots of work sets, because some companies are notorious for work sets, making too many. Always make sure that you plan out your work sets. You don't make work sets willy-nilly. You make sure that everybody's kind of in the know and has planned it out, right? That's really important when you're creating work sets. Because you can't remove them in the project. You can't get rid of work sets only by detaching from central, right? Like I did earlier, to clean up the model, you basically have to break it, get rid of all the work sets, and then start all over again. It'll put everything back to work set 1, and then you have to go and put in your new work sets and then move all the geometry. So it's basically doing twice the work, right, which you don't want to do. Now, here's another thing real quick. Look up on my screen. Under your options here for work sets, there's this work sharing update frequency, right? This can cause network issues. If you leave this display on in the project and you just start going to other views and leave the color settings on, that's going to bog down the process and the network settings and synchronization and all this other stuff. So what my recommendation is to kind of set your frequency to kind of a little bit lower. What this is doing is checking for updates so that it will change the colors of the work sets, right? You shouldn't be, moving things that fast in a project anyway. And the other thing here is that when you get out of this view or you're done with the display, just turn it off, right? I turn it off and it turns off the display like this, right? Now, to show you what I meant by, I can, when it's on, I can switch over to other views in the project and it not really affect it, right? It doesn't show, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't look like I have that thing on, but it's still on in the background. And that could be bad for, again, performance-wise. So that could be something that you guys can stay on top of. Turn it off when you're done with it and then move on. Now, when you're moving geometry to a work set, it's pretty simple. You just select geometry that you want to move or to change, right? And I'll take this ductwork here, and in my properties palette, let me turn off my browser here, you have a work sets pull-down menu, and it tells you what work set it's on, whether you want to move it to a different work set or not, right? It's up to you. Also, there's a couple of other places on the screen that will give you the ability to get to work sets quicker. Again, let me maximize my Revit session here. Down at the bottom of the screen, you have the work sets button here. It brings up the dialog box. There's my pull-down list of the different work sets, so I can switch between them as I'm adding geometry, just like you would a layer in AutoCAD. That's the only similarity, is you have to switch this here to mechanical equipment to add new mechanical equipment to the project, right? So that it's on the right work set, right? It displays it here as well as it down here at the bottom, okay? All right, now, when you're working in teams and you're working in this work sets and work sharing environment, this is something that I want to make sure I tell you guys before we lose time here, is when you're saving to your local or to C drive, you save every 15 to 30 minutes, and you synchronize to central every 2 to 4 hours, right? We had a firm that would spend, the subcontractors come in early in the morning. They were there 6 in the morning till about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we had 3 users that were doing 10 hours or so worth of work, or 8 hours or so worth of work, and they were at the very end of the day when they left, they were hitting synchronize to central. All of them were at the same time, bogging down the network and the process, and they were experiencing lots of corruption. So once they staggered out, they're saved, but also saved frequently. You don't want to wait 8 hours to sync to central, right? You want to synchronize every 2 hours. You go to lunch, synchronize to central, shut Revit down. Never even leave Revit running. I know with CAD groups, in the past we left CAD in the background, no problems. The AutoCAD gremlin would come in every now and then. With Revit, you don't ever want to leave it running in the background. You take a break, you go to a conference meeting, you have to go pick up the kids for lunch or something from school. Don't leave the projects open. Synchronize to central, close it out, right? Relinquish all of your rights to everything and shut Revit down. Never leave Revit open in the background. That's going to save you and your team some time and effort. So, and as well as save on corruption. It's when those models kind of start freaking out and we don't know what happened, because it wasn't a physical process. It just wasn't something. It was something that was forgotten, like, saving and synchronizing at a proper time, and organize or keeping that coordinated, right? The last part of this is your templates. Templates rule the world in Revit. Everything in Revit revolves around a template. So for everyone that's new on the call to Revit, if you ever start a new project from scratch and you just want to kind of get in there to kind of take a look around, always start with the mechanical templates, because that's going to give you what you know, some duct and pipe. If you start with the wrong architectural and coordination templates, you're going to just kind of be kind of bewildered on what the heck is going on with this software, right? So keep that in mind. Here are considerations for your templates to kind of work through or work from in Fabrication for your Revit environments. It's up to you whether you want to utilize these or not, but there's some that you can take note of. And then some best practice here, because Revit is not compatible, right? And this e-transmit process can do a lot of this shortcutting of all these picks and clicks. You always want to maintain the families and templates in the oldest version of Revit you have in-house. Autodesk provides 3 licenses or 3 versions of Revit per each user, right? So right now we're in 2020, 2019, and 2018 I've installed on my systems. Any kind of new custom updated families or templates or anything new I want to add to our standards, I'm going to be developing it in Revit 2018. Because if we get a project in tomorrow that's 2019, and in 2 weeks we get a brand new project that they wanted in 2020, right? And everything that we do now or that's new is 2020, we can't save that back, right? So all our standards or all our new stuff is only going to take effect in 2020 and beyond, but we want to be able to be a little bit flexible there, right? So develop all of this in 2017 or 2018. I still keep my families in 2010 versions, and again, if they need to be updated, of course, update, but get them to like at least the 3rd version of the version that's currently out, which is kind of like right now 2018. Okay. Model management. What should you know when you finish the project, right? Use your last project for developing standards for future use. Minimize your families. Maintain 3 versions again, right? Archive central files and Revit projects. Use eTransmit. It works. It'll shortcut all of this process. When you get into kind of troubleshooting things, there's journal files and, of course, backups that you can look through the help for a little bit more information. But be familiar with the backup processes and your journal files and how to find those, okay? Keep Revit up to date. If you and 3 of your users or your team members are all on mixed versions of Revit, it causes corruption. So keep everybody up to date with the latest and greatest version. If you're testing out the latest build or the latest update, make sure you're not working in a work shared project and bringing that to your live project, right? Test it on a separate system or something, and then bring it into prime time. But don't go mixed versions now, especially when you're work sharing, right? All right, here's some resources here, ASTI.com, and the Autodesk blog for Revit. And I think that's all the time I have, and we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gabe, for that. That was awesome and very, very informative. And thank you, everybody, for being, patient with us as we had some spotty audio. Gabe, there's quite a few questions, so I don't know if you want to go through and answer. And if you have any other questions, everybody that's on the line, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Definitely. Let me pull out the questions box here, and let's go over them. I'll start from the top, and I'll try to work my way through this. And again, if we don't answer all of them, I'll do our best to kind of get through them here. Is there a distortion? I apologize. My headphones. Evil robots. Garbage. Can't see the screen.
Here, I'll feed them to you. How about that, Gabe?
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
We had lots of good comments about you being abducted by aliens and whatnot with the audio.
Awesome.
All right. So we got our first question from Christopher Nash. He asked early on, do you still recommend not upgrading an existing project?
Yes, not in the middle of the project. That's yes, never, never, ever, ever upgrade in the middle of a project.
Awesome. All right, next question from Wade. He said, what kind of stuff should you not delete when cleaning up the files?
You know, the only thing that I can think of in a linked model is that's super important is going to be the levels, right? All views, I mean, you know, everything on level, but the views can be manipulated in all sorts of kinds of ways with filters, and things can be on and off per the user's preferences. So the levels is really what I see is critical. Maybe a couple of elevations just to kind of get a side profile of the levels, but everything else can go. 3D views, everything, sheets, you know, all that stuff, purge it out. At least the one that you're using in your working models, right?
Awesome. Okay, and then Fran asked, I see you selected R-2018 file to e-transmit. Was that an error?
No, it might have been. I'm not sure where that was, but I probably should have been e-transmitting a different file. I'll double check that process. I don't know what I did there. Let's see,
Sorry about
e-transmit a
that, Fran. We
model.
probably should have got to you earlier.
It's all right. The files, the names, yeah, I would have to probably, if it's the confusion of the name, it's because, yeah, it'll e-transmit the file no matter what. With the name in there, I could have maybe renamed it. That was probably the question there.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll just move right along. Christopher asked,
Okay.
can you lock certain things down when transmitting, like fabrication parts databases?
No, if the database is in the project, right, it's going to come with the project. I think it was an ESJ or something like that, I think in Academy P. I'm not really familiar with my Academy P formats, but, you know, like you can transmit a CAD file with your database in it. When you put databases in your Revit models, it's in there. So if sometimes the databases can get corrupted, or you'd have to kind of go back in there and you know, add additional databases or modifications. But sometimes it could be even good to put in like your top 5, you know, standard services in your templates maybe, or in a fab template. It's kind of going to be kind of large, but that might be something to test out in your environment to see if it'll work for you.
Okay, we just have a couple more. Josh asked,
Sure.
if you upgrade the model on your C drive, does that affect the central file?
Well, you shouldn't be doing it separately from the central file, but yes, it will. Actually, it'll break your file. For sure, it'll break your file, and it probably would corrupt the central model. So what would happen is, say, you know, you would go then to your coworker and get their good local file and make it the new central file, and then everybody redistribute new files. So it probably would corrupt and break it, yeah.
And right along that thought, Fran asked, should I overwrite my local file on each day or append the timestamp?
That's a good question. You know, depending on your standards and what kind of information your project managers are looking for, you know, if you want to use it for timesheets and things like that, it could be helpful with the timestamp. You know, but just typically, daily overriding is, you know, pretty standard. You know, just override it every day. That's kind of the new standard. It's a new norm right now. It's just everybody's creating new locals. Leave that checkbox, and this is a great question. Everybody look up on my screen real quick. When you open a central file, or when it's a central model, right down here at the bottom, this create new local checkbox is always going to be checked on. You would just need to be checking audit periodically to just clean up the model when you open up your local.
Awesome. And then our last question, what is the max file size you recommend for a single Revit file? We noticed some issues on larger projects with work sets.
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, if you're doing your due diligence and cleaning up the links, removing all non-essential stuff, get rid of all the extra CAD stuff that's not in there. Maybe even doing what we call doing a save as. I didn't know this, but this is a cool little trick. If you did like, of course you wouldn't do this in a work shared project with everybody in it, right? But to clean up a file. if you do a save as and change the name, it removes more of the stuff that's kind of stuck behind, and then you name it back and you can reduce it a little bit further. So basically call it out, clean up all non-essentials, right? Get rid of everything that's in there that's not needed, CAD, everything else, images, hunt everything down, and then I think that would be just kind of keeping it clean like that, and then separating it by work sets. Maybe more work sets might help, and doing what would they call demand loading. If you look up on my screen again one more time, here under the open option, when you open up a work share project, it's usually set to all by default. I can say that I want to specify the work set that I want to open, and that's demand loading. That might help with performance. Might not file size, but performance that's really getting you guys down. And maybe doing what we call demand loading, opening up just what you need, can help with performance. File size, at least, I mean, it's with terabytes and all of this technology kind of jumping leaps and bounds nowadays. 100, 200 megabytes isn't a big deal anymore. The record I've seen is in the 900s, 900s on our end. And those are hot, massive files. But a couple hundred megabytes is a good file size nowadays, but depending on, again, your infrastructure. If you have 5-year-old computers, do you keep your computers clean, right? I always make an analogy to my students. Your computer is your vehicle. If you are a delivery driver, you need to change the oil, put gas in it, right? Are you doing any of that stuff to your computer? Are you cleaning it up, or is your IT teams doing that? If you have a old computer that's got 30 different softwares that are not related to Revit or Fabrication, and they're running in the background, then there's nothing you can do with file size or best practices to alleviate that, right? And you kind of start with a whole new setup, at least, right? Which that is not possible, because it's not practical cost-wise, right? But do a check. Go through all your systems are on your team and see what you can do to kind of get everything up to par and cleaned up. Follow these best practices. Audit often, and you should be doing okay. File size shouldn't matter after eventually, I think, hardware catching up.
All right, and I know we're a few minutes over. I think there's just one last question for Brad, and if anybody else has a question, we'll definitely answer it afterwards. But Brad asked, is there a way to upgrade the database for MEP fabrication parts?
I don't know about upgrading. I'm not sure what the question means. If there's a way to upgrade the database for fabrication parts, I don't think it matters version-wise with the fabrication parts in Revit. So, like, the database basically managed through Fabrication CAD MEP. It's not managed through Revit at all. So if you're having database issues or questions, you can't do anything in Revit, really. It's all through Fabrication CAD MEP. Now, there is a plan for Forge and the database to be managed online eventually in the cloud, but that's just planned and it's just hearsay, and we don't have any specifics on that just yet. But Google Revit roadmap, January 2018, and you'll see all the functionality that's coming up for the latest versions. So there's no need, I don't think, for an upgrade of the parts, but it might be a reload of the configuration, and that is project specific. There's really I'd have to troubleshoot it with the model, in other words.
Awesome. So if anybody else has questions, please feel free to send them in and we will answer them after the webinar. And like I said, the recording will be sent out later today. So thank you, Gabe. That was great, very informative. I think everybody on here learned a lot. I know I did.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Ryan, real quick, do I recommend auditing every time a new local file? Yes, just do it. Again, it's a good habit to get into. It's not going to hurt anything.
Awesome. Always answering questions. All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, guys. Have a great week.